Good morning. Today is Monday, the 22nd day of Shevat. Today, of course, is the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's wife. She was a very special woman. She passed away in Tafshin Memches, 1988. I remember I was then in California as a shliach, and the Rebbe, when he said, when first thing he said, they should notify all the shluchim. And we came here to New York to pay a yeshiva call to the Rebbe. And the Rebbetzin was devoted to Yiddishkeit in a very humble way. And in fact, also when the Rebbe, really in 1950, as we all know, the first year, the Rebbe did not want to take the leadership, become Rebbe. And the Rebbetzin was also very instrumental in convincing the Rebbe to accept the leadership. And she said to the Rebbe that if he's not going to accept it, that the 30 years of Mesiras Nefesh of her father, the previous Rebbe, is going to go to waste. That was, as the story goes, this is one of the things that convinced the Rebbe to accept the Rebbe. And she gave away her husband, the Rebbe, to all Am Yisrael. So Schus Yogan Aleinu. This year is her schus. And so let's begin. We are in the middle of chapter 23. And this chapter, the Alter Rebbe explains the special unity that we get through doing the mitzvahs, and even a more special unity that we achieve through the study of the Torah. And to a brief overview how we got to this point. So again, Alter Rebbe explains that the Torah and mitzvahs are the only way to connect to Hashem. And this is as the way the Alter Rebbe explains how a Jew is able to connect to God, and that he does not want to be separated from Hashem. How it is easy to achieve this connection, serving Hashem and connecting to Hashem. The Alter Rebbe explained that this is by understanding that just like idolatry is out of the question. Why? Because deep inside, our neshama doesn't let it. The soul of a Jewish soul does not let it. Yes, it can happen. You can see, unfortunately, that some cases, you see Jews do the wrong thing, and even idolatry. But the Alter Rebbe says, Al Pi Harov, in the majority cases, even a person who has no connection, is not raised religious, but when he feels that he's doing something will separate him from Hashem, he's not going to do it. So therefore, it says the Alter Rebbe that when you think, it gives a whole explanation in chapter 20, that the whole world, if you think about what is idolatry, what is the oneness of Hashem, and we say Hashem Echad, God is one, and anything that denies the oneness of God is in a way idolatry. When we say God is one, is that everything in the world, the whole world, everything is nullified in the presence of Hashem. It's not that there is no other gods, but there is no other thing exists except from Hashem. And then he explains how in our eyes we do feel separated because of all the contractions that Hashem contracted His light in order for us to feel that we are separate entities. All the way that they can lead to creation of something which negates God, opposes God, the evil, the impurities, and so on. And this, says the Alter Rebbe, is the first 2 commandments of the 10 commandments that we read last Shabbos. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am your God, includes in it, it contains in it all of the mitzvahs. And lo yeh lecha elokim acherim, do not have any other gods, contains in it all of the negative mitzvahs. Why? Because when you realize that when you give any other entity any value, it's like negating Hashem. So therefore, if everything is Hashem, you want to be connected to Hashem. How is it the way connected to Hashem? Through the mitzvahs. And that's what he brought from the Zayar, that through the mitzvahs are considered the organs of Hashem. And the Torah is one with God. So, and we explained yesterday that the organs of God is when you do a mitzvah, you're fulfilling God's will. What is God's will? Whatever mitzvah it is. So it's not that you become one with God. You become united, but it's not one. Meaning you're doing what you're doing, you're using an object like tefillin, like candles, lighting candles, whatever you do, you're using an object and you're fulfilling with that object God's will. So just like the organ fulfills the will of the person and fulfills it instantly, the same thing, when you do a mitzvah, you become connected with Hashem. And here comes, it says that when you study the Torah, it is a deeper unity, it's a stronger unity, it's the ultimate unity with Hashem, the perfect unity. Why? Because the Torah, that is God's will. You're studying God's will. You're not fulfilling something else which is God's will. You are becoming one with Hashem because your mind now studies God's will, whether it's the obviously in different levels people understand, and even if you just say the words. So let's look inside. The Alter Rebbe continues with explaining this concept of the godly unity, the unity that you achieve through the study of the Torah. Says the Alter Rebbe, ומייחר שרוצן העליון המיוחד באין סוף ברוך הוא בתכלס הייחוד, הוא בגילוי לגמרי, ולא באסתר פנים כלל וכלל. Now, since the divine will, which is in perfect unity with God Himself, stands completely revealed in the divine soul and in its inner garments, the divine will, which is the Torah, in the Torah is the divine will, God's will. It's connected with the inner garments. We explained yesterday. What is the inner garments? The thoughts and the speech. While a person occupies himself with the Torah, it's that while a person is occupied himself with the words of Torah, and there is nothing obscuring the divine will at that time. He says, why? Because when one studies Torah, the divine will and wisdom contained in it come into full expression in one's soul and its faculty of thought and speech. Because, as we said yesterday, that the will of Hashem is the wisdom of Hashem, is one with Hashem. And when you study it, then this will becomes united with you. מיוחדים ממש, באין סוף ברוך הוא באיזה שעה, בתכלס הייחוד. It follows that at that time, the soul and these garments of thoughts and speech are also truly united with God. כייחוד דיבורו ימחשבתו של הקדוש ברוך הוא במהוסו ועצמוסו כנזכר. With a unity comparable to that of God's speech and thought with his essence and being as explained above. We explained earlier that the speech of Hashem and the thoughts of Hashem is one with Hashem himself. So when you study the Torah, you become similarly united with God's wisdom and God's will. Because nothing is separated from God except insofar as his countenance is concealed. What does it mean his countenance is concealed? You can understand it in two ways. One way is that God conceals his countenance in order for there to be separate entities. The other way to understand is when we conceal the countenance of Hashem. That this is going to explain in length in the next chapter. That just like the mitzvahs connect the Jew to Hashem, so too is when a person, God forbid, violates and he transgresses, that is the concealment of God. So a person is able to cause concealment of Hashem's presence, Hashem's countenance. V'lo yoid. And here the Alter Rebbe says more than that. If you think about, if you ask yourself a question, where does Hashem's presence reveal? Where is Hashem's presence more? Where is godliness? Where is the more godliness? Here, in this world, or in the spiritual world, in Gan Eden, in higher spiritual worlds? The common answer would be, of course, the higher world. Gan Eden has much greater light. That's what we live all our entire life. We live waiting to achieve this level to come to Gan Eden. There Hashem's light is revealed. But here comes the Alter Rebbe and tells us that the truth is that here, in this world, we have a greater level of godliness, more than in the Gan Eden. Yes, it's not revealed, it's not sensed, you're not able to see it, to feel it. But the reality is that in this world, God's presence is more than in the higher worlds. God is within the Torah in this world. This is why we say in the Mishnah, it says, Yofa Sho Achas, that 1 hour of pleasure in the world to come is greater than all the entire pleasures that you can possibly have in this physical world. That's one statement. And there is another statement that says that for 1 hour of tshuva and ma'asim tovim in this world is greater than the entire olam haba, the entire world to come. And those two statements seem contradictory. Which one is it? And the answer is, it's not a contradiction. That the feeling of the revelation of the pleasure of godliness is in the next world. Here we don't feel it. And the pleasure, the greatness of godliness is greater than all kinds of pleasures that you may have in this physical world. But yet, in the same time, tshuva and ma'asim tovim, when you do tshuva, when you do good deeds, you study Torah, this is greater than the entire world to come. Why? Because the entire world to come is spiritual revelation, godly revelation. When you have godly revelation, obviously, there is a limit to it because God is endless. It doesn't matter how great level you achieve, the neshamas, which they constantly achieve more and more, they reach greater godliness, but it's all limited. It's all limited compared to the endless, the essence of Hashem. So this is the external part of Hashem in a sense, compared to the Torah and the mitzvahs. Why? Because the Torah, what is the Torah? It is the will of Hashem. It is the inner will of Hashem. And because of that inner will, everything else exists. The higher worlds receive their godly presence and the godly revelations through the Torah that is done in this world. That is why in this world, when we study Torah, even though we don't feel it, we don't see it. And there's a reason why we don't see it, because if we would see it, we wouldn't exist. So Hashem created us especially in a way that we shouldn't see it. And we fight our Yetzer Hara, and we go and we study the Torah, which is the will of Hashem, the wisdom of Hashem, which is one with Hashem himself. And when we do this, we gain something that all of the higher worlds, the spiritual worlds, they receive from our Torah study, from our doing of the mitzvahs. So let's see it as the Alter Rebbe says is inside. Says the Alter Rebbe, v'lo yoid. Moreover, elo sheyichudam hu beyeser se'eis, beyeser oiz miyichud oir ein sof baruch hu ba'olam Yisrael yenim. Their unity, the unity of the divine soul and its faculties with God that is attained through Torah study is even more exalted and more powerful than the unity of God's infinite light with the upper spiritual worlds. Why? So the Alter Rebbe explains, for the divine will is actually manifest in the soul and its garments that are engaged in Torah study. Since it is identical with the Torah being studied. That is the will of Hashem. The Torah that you study, that is the will of Hashem. And in the higher worlds, they receive from the Torah. All the supernal worlds, they receive their vitality by way of the light and life derived from the Torah. The Torah, which is God's will and wisdom, as it is written, you have made them all with wisdom. Thus it follows that God's wisdom, meaning the Torah, transcends them all. And so this is the way you can give you the example of when you have something, goes well, when you have a plan, you're building something, you're building a business. You have a lot of things involved to make sure that the business goes right. You have office, you have employees, you have furniture, you have everything, you have so much involved to make sure that everything goes right. But the bottom line is the profit. And when the profit goes well, then you have excitement in everything that is involved. And you encourage and you give bonuses to the employees and you make the nice office and whatever is needed. If the bottom line goes well, then everything else benefits. Same thing here with the Torah, which is the ultimate will of Hashem. That's the bottom line. that is one with Hashem. And when the Torah is being studied, when a Jew studies Torah, and all of the malachim, all of the spiritual levels, everything else that is involved, that leads up to the creation of this physical world and human beings and Jewish people sitting and studying Torah, everything else benefits. So when a Jew studies Torah here, whatever happens above in the spiritual world, it happens through our actions right here in this world. Continues the Alter Rebbe. In fact, the Torah, God's will, is described as encompassing all worlds, all the worlds. Meaning that it is a level that cannot become clothed within the worlds. Rather, it animates and illuminates them as if from a distance, from above, in a transcending and encompassing manner. That powerful light cannot come in a clothed manner, only in an encompassing manner. But nevertheless, in the Torah, it is there. That powerful, encompassing light is in the Torah. And it is this level which transcends all the worlds that is clothed in a truly revealed form in one's soul and his soul garment when he studies Torah. So you're going to say, but we don't see it. We don't feel it. Says the Alter Rebbe, even though he does not see it, but the neshama feels it. And the Alter Rebbe says in parentheses, in the brackets, he says that this is why we can have the Torah, because we don't feel it. So when one studies Torah, he is unable to consciously experience the unity of his soul with God, which is attained thereby. But yet the soul feels it. In fact, says this is precisely why he can endure such unity with God, precisely because he cannot feel it, unlike the supernal worlds, where godliness is not obscured as it is in this world, and they cannot therefore endure such a unity with God without becoming completely nullified and losing their identities entirely. This is why it says, mentioned by the first two commandments, the Jewish people heard this directly from Hashem. This was more of a godly revelation. That's why they all died after the first two commandments. After each commandment, they passed away. They couldn't contain it. It was too much. And Hashem revived them. And what's the point? The point is to give us in our subconscious that the neshama had this experience, and the neshama did see godliness. And because of that, forever, our neshama subconsciously knows that it sees God and doesn't want to be disconnected from Hashem. Concludes the Alter Rebbe in today's class and says, "B'zeh yuvan lama godla ma'oid malas eisik ve'eisik b'teira yeser mikol hamitzvos." Says this discussion of the exalted unity with God attained through Torah study, which is even greater than that accomplished by performing the mitzvahs, and this explains why the Torah study is so much loftier than all of other commandments, including even prayer. Even prayer, which affects unity with the supernal worlds, because through the study of the Torah, the unity of Hashem, the unity that they achieved with Hashem, is the ultimate unity. says, although the law requires of anyone who Torah studies not his entire occupation, that he interrupt his study for prayer, which would seem to indicate that prayer surpasses Torah study. This is so only because he would, in any case, pause and interrupt his studies. What is the Alter Rebbe saying here? He's saying that if we just explain that the Torah study is a greater unity, so why do we have to stop studying Torah to go to pray? And Alter Rebbe explains that this is the case only when a person his entire occupation is in Torah study. Like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the great sages. Back in those days, there were some sages that would pray only once in 30 days because their occupation is fully with the Torah. But being that most people, they need, according to Torah, they need to stop. And not everyone is in that level to have this Torah that is in Torah, this would be an entire occupation. And therefore they need to stop to do their work, to do other things. That is why we need to do the prayer as well. But in essence, we understand, we get an appreciation that when we study Torah, we understand that we connect to Hashem with the perfect unity, more than the malachim, more than the angels, and more than any other thing. The study of the Torah unite with Hashem in the perfect unity. So this is the end of today's shir with Hashem. We'll do it again tomorrow. Join us and don't forget to share this with friends, with anyone you know. Any questions we can take now.